What would you do if you found disturbing racist text messages that were allegedly written by your boss? Would you keep what you knew secret for fear of losing your job? Or would you reveal the information even if it put you in the middle of a devastating controversy? Abdallah Hawa and Teresa Powell faced that dilemma, but very quickly decided to do the right thing and disclose what they knew. We talk about their decision to reveal racism right now on It's Your Call. Hello everyone, thanks so much for joining us. I'm Lynn Doyle. The Coatesville School District, which is just right outside of Philadelphia, was rocked at the beginning of the school year with news that two of its top administrators were accused of exchanging racist, sexist, hateful text messages. Richard Como, the 67-year-old superintendent, and Jim Donato, the high school's athletic director, are accused of using derogatory language to describe people of color, women, people of Middle Eastern descent, and the Jewish faith, among others. When the district's technology director discovered the exchanges, he shared them with a school administrator, and together they notified the school board. Ultimately, the community found out, and the community reaction was vehement. Both men have since left the school district, but the controversy continues because they were not fired, but retired and resigned respectively. Many are now calling for those actions to be repealed and for the men to be fired. So our first question to you this hour, should the men accused of racist texting be fired, or is it okay for them to retire and or resign? It's your call. Let's find out what our panel thinks. It includes Michael Price, a reporter at the Daily Local News in Westchester, Pennsylvania. That's the newspaper that originally broke the text messaging story. He's been covering this story from the very beginning. Also with us is Chad Dion Lassiter, who is a national expert on race relations and the president of Black Men at Penn at the University of Pennsylvania School of Social Policy and Practice. Joining us as well is Will Jordan. He's an associate professor of urban education at Temple University. His research and teaching focuses on understanding the conditions of education in city schools and strategies to improve them. And rounding out the panel is Dr. Amy Moore. She's a licensed family and marriage therapist who formerly provided school-based counseling. She's now in private practice in South Jersey. I welcome everyone to the show. I appreciate your perspective on this. I want to start, though, first with Mike, because you have been covering this from the very beginning. Can you very succinctly describe what this controversy is all about?
Sure. Well, it started obviously when the text messages were discovered by Mr. Hawa. He immediately brought it to members of the school board. They were hoping that the school board would take action against Mr. Como and Mr. Donato. Obviously, they felt that didn't happen. They were unhappy with the school board's actions. The text messages were eventually leaked to the district attorney's office and to our newspaper. Once we printed the newspaper, obviously the public outrage just sort of took off.
So let's go back to the beginning and explain to our viewers how the text messages were discovered.
Sure.
To begin with, because I think you'll agree with me when you hear this that it's really a very bizarre case of uncovering it.
Sure. It started when Mr. Donato, who's the athletic director, was scheduled to get a new district-issued cell phone. He actually got two new phones because he was unhappy with the color of the first one. But when he got his new phone, he gave it to Mr. Hawa to copy all the data over from the old phone over to his new one. That data included the text messages that were on his phone. So while Mr. Hawa was performing just a routine data exchange of the phones, he discovered the text messages.
And when he discovered these messages, there were very offensive, derogatory words used to describe people of color, the N-word specifically.
Sure.
There were inflammatory comments about other people who worked in the school district. And allegedly, these exchanges were not just from the one phone, but also to the superintendent.
Yeah, the bulk of the offensive text messages were between Mr. Donato and Mr. Como, but these exchanges referenced specific students, faculty members, many of them actually described with very offensive language Mr. Hawa himself based off his Arab descent. So he immediately decided that he needed to bring them to a higher authority.
So he went to an administrator, Teresa Powell, Dr. Powell, and together they made the decision that even though it might put them in the middle of a controversy, that they would take this to the school board.
Sure.
And to the people above them. Certainly when your boss is one of the people that you would normally go to, it must have been a very difficult situation for them.
Yeah, they took a great risk, I think, by bringing them forward. And like I said, they did bring it to the school board, hoping that the school board would fire these men immediately. it didn't go that way. They apparently felt that the school board was prepared to allow them to even remain in their positions before they even called for them to resign. They didn't ask the men to resign until after the messages were brought to the district attorney's office.
So it's once it was public, a certain action was taken, but before that, the allegation is that the school board did not react.
Well, the resignations came before we printed the text messages, but they had already gone to the district attorney's office. They were, I think, hoping that they could sort of have the men, they've said publicly that they wanted the men to leave the district quietly and sort of limit the controversy that would obviously come from discovering the text messages.
And how'd that work out?
Not so well.
Not so well. That is the understatement. So now, bring us up to speed on what the most recent status of this case is. The two men have left. Our attempts to reach out to them or attorneys have been unsuccessful. The school board took this action, but it had vehement reaction from the community who wanted the men fired, and now the school board itself finds itself under fire.
Sure. 2 days after we printed the text messages, there was a school board meeting, a regularly scheduled school board meeting. Over 1,000 people came out, and they were very angry, to say the least. They, for over 3 hours of a public comment period, called for the board to fire the men instead of accepting their resignations. That didn't happen. They allowed them to resign. Since then, there's been a criminal investigation that we've learned has sort of predated the discovery of the text messages, but now has accelerated because of this sort of ongoing scandal. There's a grand jury that has convened recently, an investigative grand jury, where they're looking into, I believe, the handling of the text messages from the district side.
Can you give us any information as to why there would be a criminal investigation? I'm sure people at home are saying, okay, yeah, these guys were stupid and they were offensive, but is that criminal?
Sure. The district attorney's office has acknowledged that the criminal investigation predated the discovery of the text messages. So they were looking at these two men prior to the text messages even being discovered.
Perhaps not necessarily for the texting, but for something else?
Sure. Well, in the texting, there are numerous references to what could be interpreted as illegal activity, talking about money, kickbacks related to the football program, that type of thing.
And the grand jury would be convened for what purpose?
We don't really know. Grand juries are convened in secret, so we don't have a full confirmation of what it's about. Is it about the activity that was referenced in the text messages? Is it about the district's handling of the text messages? I would believe that it's more about the district's handling, just based off the witnesses that have been called. Okay,
so we brought you up to speed for what we know now you know. If you want to join in and tell us what you think about all of this, you can email me directly at lynn@lynndoyle.net. We're going to check in with some of your comments later on in the show, but I want to bring the rest of the panel in. Okay, we need a wide shot here because I need to, by show of hands, this may not be criminal, but does anyone else think this is just plain stupid?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, right. Chad, weigh in here. I mean, number one, what are these guys thinking?
Well, first and foremost, they're not thinking. We're talking about disgusting, despicable, and deplorable behavior. We're also talking about power. We're not talking about janitors, and we're not talking about mere teachers. We're talking about prejudice and power from an institutional standpoint of looking at the school superintendent and athletic director. We're talking about individuals who primarily thought that they were not going to get caught. Thank God for the advantage of having technology in the 21st century that we're able to capture this data. And then we're also talking about the whitewashing of racism in the sense that you have certain people who are in positions of power in the district who are maintaining the status quo.
Well, I agree with that, and I think that it's not about simple racist jokes being said. Those texts relate to people, kids, and administrators. I think one of the things I found are pretty disturbing, lots I found disturbing, one particular, was the references to staff who were about to be laid off. I think it was 23 staff members that were going to be released at upcoming board members, and a question of, well, how many of them are inward?
Yeah.
You know, so it's speech that's sort of connected to the actions that I find deplorable.
Amy, I'm really interested in trying to get into the minds of these people who work day in and day out, particularly with kids of color, and project in one form like they're being supportive adults, and then literally behind their back picking up the phone and saying, you know, these offensive, horrible things. I mean, how does that mentality work?
Yeah, I mean, it's mind-boggling, and to the kids whose lives are affected by this, my heart goes out to them, because there probably are some kids that are devastated to find out that people that they've respected and looked up to secretly harbor these really prejudiced beliefs. But I don't find it very surprising, because we do live in a very prejudiced world, and people in power, they hide their prejudiced beliefs.
Every time we do a show like this, and Chad is on here quite often when we talk about it, when you say prejudice still exists, it always shakes me right to the core, because I'm like, I thought we
Yeah.
made so much
Yeah.
progress.
No.
And then
Yeah.
something like this happens and you think, gosh, we're right back where we were
Yeah.
50, 60,
Well,
100 years ago.
We still have people that can't get married. What do you mean? We're right back where we were. We're there.
Right.
Yeah. And then we're so quick to want to be post-racial because we got the first African-American president of the United States of America, but we don't want to do the hard work of addressing forms of homophobia, xenophobia, and
Exactly.
anti-Semitism. And so we just have to do the work, and it has to be sustainable efforts, and we have to get to the point where we just address it and we call it for what it is.
Well, that's what we're doing here. We are calling it. It was revealed by these two very brave district employees, and now we're giving you an opportunity to tell us what you think about it. Do you agree with the school board's decision to accept the resignations and retirement of the men involved in the alleged texting scandal, or do you think there should be more severe repercussions? That's where we're going to start. We'll find out what our guests think. But you can email me during the break at lynn@lynndoyle.net. You can also find us on Facebook and follow me on Twitter. We'll be right back. You are looking at an example of the kinds of disturbing texts that were discovered by employees in the Coatesville School District. Texts that were apparently and allegedly exchanged between two high-ranking members of the school's administration. If you look at that and you see the number of times that the N-word particularly was used, it's something that literally will make your stomach turn. This hour we're talking about these texts, which were brought to the attention of the school board, which then allowed the gentleman in question to retire and resign respectively. This segment, we want to know what you think about that. Start emailing me right now at lynn@lynndoyle.net. So let's take a poll here. I know, Michael, you have to remain objective because you are a journalist, but in your reporting, what have you found in terms of people's reaction to the retirement, resignation versus firing?
Sure. I mean, clearly there was outrage. The rumors about what was going on started before the text messages or even the resignations became public. Obviously, like I mentioned before, over 1,000 people turned out for that school board meeting 2 days after we printed the messages. A normal attendance for a school board meeting is probably between 10 and 20 people. So that gives you an idea of how many people this affected and how angry they were. The anger really hasn't subsided any, I think mostly due to the handling of the whole controversy.
So now the anger's not so much pointed in the direction of the men who allegedly wrote the text, but the handling of the discovery of the text. Is that fair outrage?
Well, doesn't that happen in every profession? In politics, in law enforcement, in fire, in pretty much every industry we see companies protecting their own, so to speak. And I think the outrage comes from because this is education. And so they're not supposed to be, there's a certain responsibility on educators because of the influence they have over children that we expect them that they're not human.
But do you think what Mike said earlier in the first segment, that the school board was hoping that they would just go away and that there wouldn't be this big controversy?
That's what's troubling, the maintenance of the status quo. What we're looking at is you don't get to resign and leave with your dignity intact by being anti-Semitic and being a racist. I don't want you home with your 401k and your pension intact. I want you fired. I want you you're dehumanizing individuals and you're negating their humanity.
Do you really
and you're home
think
and you're okay.
either one of these men retired or resigned with their dignity intact?
Well, I'm looking at the fact that they weren't really ashamed in the sense that they're going to be home with their pensions and things of that nature, and we're still reeling from this situation. And when I'm talking about dignity, I'm talking about the sense that they're still getting paid. See, the fact that they were calling people the N-word and they were dehumanizing people and negating their humanity, I don't think they really care about individuals. They marginalize them, saw them as non-entities, saw them as non-person, subhuman, and uncivilized, and so that's why that can allow them to text in the manner that they did.
Well, I mean, I separate out prejudice on the one hand and racism on the other hand. I think initially, of course, the text, without a doubt, are horrible words, but finding out what they actually did in their behaviors takes some time for investigation. So immediately we don't know. But also, I think as well that this somewhat resembles what happened at Penn State as well, that you have a despicable act, and then you have sort of the university's response to it, and that seems to be what's going on.
And then the community reaction
and
to the university's
reaction
response.
of the actions being lenient in this case.
Can we back up for just 1 second? Because I'd like you to clarify for me the difference between someone being prejudiced and someone being racist.
Well, I think that a lot of what you just showed on the screen were jokes that some people that are watching the show right now might think are funny. We know that they're unfunny, right? But as an individual, we can act in a racially biased way. But then as a person that is at the seat of power, that can make personnel decisions, that can affect the lives of students, enacting those biases in racial prejudice is really very different. And I think initially, we don't know, we can't discern one from the other. And so that's why, learning, for example, that there was a prior investigation into these men regarding acts that they may have done.
And that's what I find really interesting, because now, as you both have pointed out, that if they're in the position of power and they get to make decisions, and you find that they're making decisions based on the color of a person's skin or the sexual orientation or the sex, because they were pretty sexist
absolutely.
in regard to some women on the staff and to girls as well. So I mean, this was across the board offensive.
And I don't want to underscore Amy's point in the sense that from an educational perspective, as a parent, as a guardian, you entrust your child with educators.
Right.
And young people are oftentimes verbalizing that they want to know that you care before they care to know what you know. And so here we have adults who are saying that we really don't care about you. And behind your back, they're doing this. And we don't know if it's actually happening in the classroom. We don't know how the athletic director are treating basketball and football players on the field.
Right.
And so that's the data that we don't know. And if that emerges, then what is that going to be? Could that be problemsome and troublesome as well?
Well, another troubling thing from the school district's response is that if this had been swept under the rug and these men were just quietly allowed to resign or retire, the circumstances of their departure from the district would never have been known. I mean, they could have gone on to get other jobs in districts quite near here, and no one would have ever known the reason why they left the district they were in before.
And I'm glad you mentioned that point, because then you're going with your same prejudice and your same racial overtones to another district, to another school, continuing the maintenance of the status quo of dehumanizing individuals. And it's just really troubling. It's troubling from varying levels for parents who send their children to school and thinking that their children are in a school where people actually care about them.
Really, you know what it tells you is that we've said that 1,000 times, you never really know people. You know, you think you know them, and then you find out something like this. I wonder what the friends and family and neighbors of these men are saying. It's like, who knew? It's the same way when people go into a movie theater and open fire. It's like, well, I didn't think that was going to happen, you know. So it's just one of those things you just have to be so careful all the time. I'm going to check in with our Facebook comments because we've gotten a tremendous amount of response. We've only been able to select a few, including Rich's, who says, of course, this is very inappropriate. I find it very sad. I thought racism was a thing of the past. Denise says, I think you should make them do community service in an area like the one they were talking about. Make them go to soup kitchens, make them go to homeless shelters. Maybe they would have a different perspective. And Troy writes, fire them, but why take their pensions? I don't get that part, to be honest. What they did was horrid if they did it, but what does that have to do with their pensions if they've been doing their jobs all along? And I do want to go back to Chad on that one, because a lot of people who did write us had that same thing. They did want them to be out of the school system and away from our children, but they didn't necessarily understand the punitive aspect of it, because it was not illegal.
No, it wasn't illegal, and
as far as we know so far.
And it may be a stretch for me, you know, and I can admit it, maybe taking their pensions away, but something has to occur. And I think one of the challenges that I have is the fact that, you know, like all of us are reaching consensus and saying is that had this not been brought to the attention of many, they would have simply walked away and could have walked into another district. But the other reality too for me is that how long have they been like this, and how long have they engaged in these type of behaviors, and not just via text messages. See, the text messages just reveal something that actually probably occurs on a continuous basis between these two, and may have in fact have other colleagues who are in the school who actually engage in these type of sentiments as well and think about people in this type of manner.
I'd love to jump in there. I mean, it's a really good point. These text messages that were discovered, all these transcripts were from a 3-week period of text messages. So who knows what was going on outside of those 3 weeks? And I think that's probably a main focus of the criminal
Do
investigation.
you think that there will be a further investigation, maybe dating back prior to those initial 3 weeks?
Well, we already know that the district attorney's office was investigating prior to those messages even being discovered. Obviously, they're not talking about specifically what they're investigating. So, yeah, I would certainly expect that there would be more to come.
I wonder if there are other people in that school district who are kind of quaking their boots or deleting because something could be perceived as being inappropriate. I have to take a quick break, but we're going to share some more of your thoughts. When we return, we also want to know what you think about this whole situation, and if you find that racism is still very prevalent where you are. I'd like to know what you think. We'll be right back. Welcome back again, everyone. I'm Lynn Doyle. This is It's Your Call, and we are talking about a topic that is very close to a lot of people's hearts. You've heard about it. It's the Coatesville School District outside of Philadelphia, where 2 administrators are accused of exchanging racist, sexist, derogatory texts. They're out now, but their getting out has caused as much controversy, I think, as sometimes the words that were said, because they did get their pensions when it was appropriate, and they were not fired. Would that have happened to you in your job? I can tell you right here, it wouldn't be happening here. Let's check in with Facebook and see what you guys think. Chris writes, not only were those 2 sexist, racist, but they were stupid as well. Nothing like giving your phone with the text on it to the guy that's in charge of your texting and your technology. They were also in charge of students, and I'm really offended by that. Bobby writes, sadly, it's the tip of the iceberg. If that's what they wrote, imagine what they think. If you want to tell us what you think, you can email me directly. If you have questions or comments for our panelists, I'll be sure to forward those along. You can always find us on Facebook and Twitter as well. So let's conclude this, because as always, we're out of time. What's the teachable moment here? We always say that when one of these controversies arise. So what can we do?
There are lots. One is that adults are not always what they seem, and that and the question I'm still struggling with is how much is words and how much is behavior. Because people are complex, and we don't know what the kids thought about Donato as football coach, and so there may be a gap there.
And yet, Michael has said that the kids haven't reacted as vehemently as the adults have.
Sure, yeah. I mean, the kids really have, from what we've heard and seen, they've been really moving forward faster than the adults in the community. I mean, I think sort of they were just trying to get back to normal, and the adults in the community are sort of handling it.
They've probably heard about this kind of stuff so frequently. We talk about it, it's in the news. Someone's always being a racist and stupid someplace, so it's not new to them.
But because the young people have not responded doesn't mean that subconsciously they're not thinking about it. So I would call for anti-racism training, not diversity training, anti-racism training that gets to the tenets of anti-Semitism, homophobic behavior for the whole entire district. And I think it has to be done by an outside force. And then I would also provide a critique for the NAACP and that area who has been quiet with regards to this situation as well.
So Amy, what would you as a therapist say to parents whose kids are not involved in this necessarily, just to advise them? What kind of advice would you give for the conversation?
Well, I loved what you said about, that adults are not always what they seem, and children are very resilient. And I would be surprised if there weren't some kids that really weren't surprised, because kids typically, they do know, they can see through people, they have a superpower, and they can see through adults, and so they do tend to know this. But I think, for parents, we need to do better. We need to be much more.
Chad always says every time he's on this show, we need to talk about it. We need to put the dialogue out there. So I appreciate you guys doing that for us today. Thank you so much for being with us.
As always, thank you, Lynn.
Wonderful to have you there. If you were unable to get your message through, email me at lynn@lynndoyle.net. Find me on Facebook. I'm under Lynn Doyle or Lynn It's Your Call Doyle. And then, of course, you can always follow me on Twitter as well. Have a good one. We'll see you next time.